You're listening to Let's Get It On with Big John McCarthy and Sean Wheelock.
Big John McCarthy has witnessed the best that the UFC had to offer.
That is it! Game, set, match! We have a new champion!
Your backstage pass to the world of mixed martial arts and combat sports. Only on the Ignotainment Media Network.
Let's get it on!
Hey everyone, welcome to Let's Get It On with Big John McCarthy and me, Sean Wheelock. Every week on this podcast, John and I give you an inside look at MMA and combat sports, always separating fact from fiction. On this week's program, we'll discuss the Joe Riggs versus Ron Stallings fight from last Saturday's UFC 191 in Las Vegas, which ended in a controversial disqualification win for Riggs. And Big John and I will be joined by Marc Raimondi of MMAfighting.com to discuss his outstanding investigative reporting on the California-based promotion Xplode Fight Series, which stages unsanctioned professional and amateur MMA bouts in the state. Plus, as we do on every episode of Let's Get It On, John will answer your questions. You can submit them via email, info@letsgetitonpodcast.com, and now on Twitter by using the hashtag AskBJM. Remember that you can download and subscribe to our podcast on the iTunes Store. For Android, download the Stitcher app and subscribe. And you can go straight to our website, letsgetitonpodcast.com.
Well, to give you an idea of how rare disqualifications are in MMA, I've commentated over 2,000 professional bouts, only 3 of which have been DQs. This past Saturday at UFC 191, Joe Riggs defeated Ron Stallings by second-round disqualification due to the illegal upkick thrown by Stallings to the head of the grounded Riggs. John, this disqualification, like all DQs virtually in the history of mixed martial arts, met with controversy, debate, and discussion.
Yeah, well, people are not going to be happy when they have a disqualification because they don't really understand it. They don't think it's, why are you doing that to him? It was just a kick. But you had the fight with, Joe was hit with a shot early in the first round that hurt his eye. You could see it. It cut him a little bit. And I believe it actually broke his orbital or, injured his orbital to the point where he's having a hard time seeing out of his eye. But he makes it through the round and he gets to that second round. And he's doing a good job against Ron. He's got him on the ground. He's pounding on him. And Ron decides that he's going to try to get Joe off of him by throwing his leg up. And he doesn't do it just the one time. He does it 3 times. And the third one hits Joe. It hits him in the face. It slides across his jaw and it slides across the eye. And you can't sit there and, question how much damage did it do to the eye past what the punch in the first round did, because now you're getting him up and he now says to the doctor, I can't see out of my eye. Now, is that due to the punch? Possibly, but the whole thing is when you end up having a foul, an illegal action that now the fighter can have as, hey, I can't see out of my eye, and it hit him in that close area, you can't say how much more damage it did. It's a foul. You went and stopped the fight. Now he's saying he can't see. Now the doctor's saying that, you know what, we're not going to let the fight go on. And so you as the referee have got to make the decision of, well, was this an unintentional action? I'm not saying that there was malice to try to actually hit, Joe in the face with the kick. I think he really wanted to just get him off, but there was absolutely, intent to do that kick. It was an intentional action. And when you do an intentional action and then you end up hitting an area that is not moving, a lot of times we'll sit there and say, hey, it was unintentional. Yes, he meant to throw the kick, but the movement of both fighters caused the actual target to move, which ended up allowing the kick to hit into a protected area. That's not what happened here. Joe wasn't really moving. He was pretty stationary in that position on the ground. He ends up doing the up kick, and then Jason has to make his call, and he says it was an intentional action. And when I have an intentional action and I have someone that can't continue on, that's a disqualification. He made the right call. People aren't going to like it, but it's just the way it is.
John, you hit on something, and I think fighters have trouble with this. I know fans have trouble with this. There's a difference between intent and malice when it comes to a foul in MMA.
Absolutely, and that's the whole thing. It's a matter of you as the official have got to look and say, did the person actually mean to throw that weapon? They're responsible for what they do. And, although sometimes we'll sit there and you're going to get a lot of referees, and I hate to say it, but, we get referees that actually lie, and they're not lying to benefit themselves. They're lying to sit there and say, well, I don't want to disqualify this fighter off of this action. And so I'm going to say that it wasn't intentional. It was unintentional or accidental, they'll say. And they do that to say, okay, well, then the end of the fight's going to be a no contest, because I don't want this person who is, fighting here to get a win when I don't believe they should. I don't believe that, this is the right course of action. So, the rules sometimes, make us do things that sometimes we don't want to do. But in this course of action that Jason Herzog took, look at it. You can sit there and say whatever you want. He did not throw that one time. So he is absolutely intentionally throwing his leg up. Now, I'm sure he wants to hit Joe to the body, or he wants to, slide it up to get it past so he can go for a triangle, whatever he wants to say. But he's responsible for where it lands. Just like with a punch, he's responsible unless the fighter is moving. And as he moves, then, you know what? The blow lands in a different spot than it was intended. That's unintentional. But we didn't have a lot of movement there. And so Jason had the hard call to make. It's not a popular call to make, but it's the right choice. He did a good job. And Ron Stallings is going to learn, hey, I can't do that action in this position because I can end up getting disqualified.
Yeah, I agree with you. I thought that Herzog really did a good job on that. Part of the confusion, though, came from Marc Ratner. Marc Ratner is VP of Regulatory Affairs, used to run the Nevada State Athletic Commission, now holds that job for the UFC. But the fight was broadcast on UFC Fight Pass. Ratner came on to try to explain it, but he said on air that he thought it was going to be a no contest. And that started, I think, then a little bit of this online discussion, and that's where maybe not anger, that's a little strong, but that's where some of this resentment started to build on the disqualification.
Yeah, well, absolutely. As soon as we have a commentator say something in any fight, we have people going, oh, what happened with Marc?
Yeah, I know a little something about that.
Yeah, and it's your fault. You got to stop doing that crap. What happened with Marc is, Marc was not wrong in what he was trying to tell people, because there was some confusion when the fight, ended up being called off. Jason came down and was trying to talk to the commission, and there was some verbiage there that Marc Ratner is sitting there. He's hearing it. And so he goes off of what he's hearing and says he thinks that this is going to be an accidental foul, and that the call is going to end up being a no contest if the fight doesn't go on. But that's not what, in the end, Jason called it. Jason, in the end, called it as an intentional. And Marc would have known if he had heard the word, oh, it's an intentional foul, Marc would have known exactly where to go with it. So there was some miscommunication. It's not Marc's fault. He knows what he heard. It was a miscommunication between Jason and the commission, but Jason cleared it up, but he didn't clear it up in time for Marc Ratner, because that's not his concern. His concern is the commission. So, though these things happen, and it's unfortunate that Marc, put out information that he knows, if given the right information, he's not going to say what he said, but this is what happens. And, sometimes commentators can make a mistake based upon the information they're given, and that's all that happened there.
I think the two most mystifying things, even for the hardcore fans in MMA, certainly for the fighters, for the trainers, for the managers, the two areas, one is scoring criteria of a round. And it shouldn't be, and we're doing our best to educate people across the board on that. The other is what happens during fouls. You always hear, oh, he should be disqualified. Oh, take a point, take 2 points, no contest, go to the scorecards. Yet there's a clear procedure. Herzog followed it the way that he is supposed to follow it, but it always seems to get lost in translation.
Yeah, and a lot of things is that, for referees, you need to understand how to handle things. And the one thing, I talked to Jason afterwards, and we sat there and talked about it. Herb talked about it with us. Bob Bennett of the Nevada State Athletic Commission. And the one thing out of all of it is the referee has got to know exactly where this is going to go. He knows what his call is going to be, and he needs to understand exactly where he's going to go with it. And sometimes we get referees that will start to rush, and because they want to try to get things going and want to try to get the fight going, and then all of a sudden the fight's not, and so they're rushing through everything. You can make a mistake, and for any referee out there, the one thing I will always tell them, Once you call time, take your time. Don't rush. You have time at this point. You're not going to make the fight any better. You're not going to do anything by rushing it. Take your time. Make sure that you make the right decisions so the right outcome is done in the end.
For Herzog, because the Nevada State Athletic Commission physician said, nope, Riggs can't continue because of the eye, his decision was essentially made right there. But hypothetically, John, fighter A versus fighter B. Fighter A is fouled. The physician says, I think he can continue. Fighter A says, no, I can't continue. What are your actions as a referee? I guess in theory, fighter A could be given a loss for timidity. I guess you could end the fight. I don't know if you've had this hypothetical, but you can see that playing out.
And look at what you have. Many times you'll have something happen, and I've had it in the past where I have a fighter who gets hit with a legal blow. Okay, he gets hurt. He makes it through that little thing, and then we'll say that he's got a cut or something like that, and then you stop the action and bring it to the ringside physician. The ringside physician looks at it and goes, nope, it's good, he can go. And the fighter goes, I can't go. And you tell him, okay, just so you understand, I'll get you out of the fight, but you're going to lose. It's going to be a TKO victory for your opponent. And he goes, but I can't go. Okay, you can't go. And the fight is over, and they lose based upon they won out of the fight. It's a TKO victory for their opponent.
I've never seen that, but in theory, then, a fouled fighter, a fighter, for instance, who takes a low blow or is kicked in the head while they're grounded, could then, under that situation, lose the fight. I can't recall that happening, though.
Well, it's happened in the past, and there's been different reasons for it. We had a fight long ago in Nevada. It was Dennis Hallman fighting Frank Trigg, and there was a low blow. Trigg hit Hallman with a low blow, and Hallman couldn't make it after the 5 minutes, and they gave the victory to Frank Trigg. And you look and you go, well, that's not right. But a lot of times what will happen in that situation, it wasn't right, and the regulation changed because of it. But many times you'll have it where we get an eye poke or something like that, and the fighter has, he doesn't have the ability to have all the time that they want. With the low blow, the fighter's in control of the time. They can take more time. But as soon as that ringside physician tells the referee, you know what, he's good, he can fight, it does not matter that the fighter says, I need 30 more seconds, I need another minute. No, you don't get that time. You must now, as the referee, start the fight because the ringside physician has said that he can fight. If he doesn't want to fight, you can end the fight, but that fighter is going to be the loser of that fight.
John, there are a lot of old school fans who say, well, they should do what they did in Pride with the yellow cards. You and I were both huge fans of Pride. I was fortunate enough to be the final English language commentator in Pride. Yellow cards weren't quite all that they're romanticized to be now, 10 years later.
No, people get this idea that the yellow card, that's really going to influence the fighter. What a bunch of crap. Okay, the yellow card, and here's the problem with the yellow card. When you see me stop a fight, and I go, stop time, and I put one fighter to a corner, another, and then you see me go and I walk over and I start, talking to the fighter, that's what we call a hard warning. Okay, or it could be a point deduction, or I could end up taking the person out of, the fight with a DQ. But what you're looking at when I don't take the point or anything, that's what we call a hard warning. I've stopped the action of the fight. I have chastised or told the fighter what his problem is, what he needs to do, and then we get the fight going again. Well, that's what a yellow card is for MMA now outside of Pride, because that's when you pull out that yellow card, it's a hard warning. You're doing the same thing. The problem with the yellow card in Pride is the yellow card used to take money out of the fighter's pocket. In Pride, every time that referee pulled that yellow card, there was 10% of the fighter's overall purse that was given back to the promoter. That, in and of itself, is total bullshit. You don't fucking take money out of a fighter's pocket because you as the referee or you as the promotion think, oh, they're not fighting fast enough for me or something like that. You want to take points. You want to possibly make it to where they're going to have a hard time winning. Okay, do that. You start taking money out of their pockets, there's ulterior motives that come into play. So the whole yellow card thing is ridiculous. A yellow card is not going to change anything within MMA the way it's structured now.
Yellow cards obviously come from soccer, from football. There's a reason for that. It's official, and 2 yellows equals a red. But there are so many verbal warnings that soccer players are given. The yellow card is, that's it, that's your official warning. In Pride, though, to me, and other Asian MMA organizations who've used it since, it really feels kind of gimmicky. I'm just not sure why people would want to see it adopted in the UFC and Bellator under the unified rules.
You know, I've used them. I've done it. You know, in other promotions, I've used the yellow and red cards. And, you know, it is exactly what you said. It's stupid. You know, the only difference is I'm pulling a card out of my pocket and putting it in front of the fighter's face and showing him putting it back. Wow, that's impressive. I'm really doing something freaking awesome there. It's just dumb.
John, final point on this. You and I talked about this yesterday off air. Tell the story of the first disqualification in UFC history, and I think it really illuminates just the actions, how much our sport has progressed since the old school days of the 1990s.
Oh, you know, well, you know, if you're gonna break it down to that, the actual first one that if I could have disqualified him, but I couldn't, there was a fight in UFC 5. It was Andy Anderson and John Hess. John Hess was a guy knocked out by Vitor Belfort, you know, in like 15 seconds. But, you know, at that time, you know, the only thing I could do was actually take the fighter's money. So I couldn't actually stop the fight. I couldn't give a point deduction. I couldn't give a foul. I couldn't disqualify. If someone did something that was illegal, and the only 2 things that were illegal back at that fight was he couldn't bite him and he couldn't eye gouge him. He kept eye gouging him. And so, you know, I kept taking his money. So in the end, he fought for free. We took all his money. But the real first disqualification that I did was it was a fight between Alex Andrade against Amri Batesh. And at the time, we had the ability to wear shoes was still allowed, wrestling shoes. And then with the wrestling shoes, the one thing is you could not kick to the head. You could kick to the body, you could kick to the legs, but if you wore the shoe, you could not kick to the head or face. And, you know, Alex, just out of training, you know, comes up and boom, he kicks Amri to the head. And so I stopped the fight and say, hey, you can't do that. And, blah, blah, blah. And then it comes to the point where he does it again in the same round. And I take points for it, and it ends up getting to the end of the round, and I actually go back to his corner. I said, look, you cannot throw a kick to his head with those shoes. If you're going to kick him in the head, take the shoes off right now. And he goes, I know, I'm sorry, right? And comes the next round, and he does the same thing. And at that time, if we had 3 fouls, you were automatically disqualified. So I disqualified him for the infraction. We actually changed the rule off of it. We came up with the ASICS split sole shoe was the one shoe. If you wanted to kick to the head with a shoe after that, you know, fight, okay, you could wear the split sole because they said, well, it didn't have a full sole on it, so it was, you know, not going to be as hard or something. Don't ask me. But you can go and then watch Pete Williams ended up kicking Mark Coleman to the face with a shoe, but it was
put him to sleep.
But it was the ASICS split sole. So there's people saying, well, why is that legal? But that's not. You know, it's like everything changed from show to show. And so all these little things that occurred, but you know, Alex Andrade got DQ'd because he ended up kicking Amri to the head too many times with a shoe.
It's so great when we talk about MMA in the 1990s. It's like we're talking about other sports in the 1890s. You know, if we were talking about baseball or the National Hockey League in the 1990s, there are subtle differences, but it's basically the same sport. MMA, it's a completely different sport. I know there are people listening to our podcast probably under the age of 20 going, shoes? What are you talking about?
What are you talking about? Yeah, all of it. You know, I get people that cracks me up, man. People on Twitter or something. They're like, "Why were you letting this guy grab the fence? You suck as a referee." It's like, well, it was legal, you fucking moron. You know, but you know they don't understand. All they know is what they know of today, and they associate it all with the past. And it's like, hey, different rule set, different days, different times. You know what? We changed it from, show to show almost. So it was, that's the way of the past. And now it's been pretty, common and current. And I think more people are getting more comfortable with, the rules that we have and the way we go about doing things.
Every week on this podcast, John and I answer your questions. Ask away via email, info@letsgetitonpodcast.com. and now on Twitter by using the hashtag AskBJM. And of course, please include a pronunciation guide for your name. First up, Tyler Jablonski. Thanks for the pronunciation guide, Tyler. John
Jablonski, that's a good name. Now
isn't that good?
That's an Irontown name right there, man.
What are your opinions of the bigger 30-foot octagon versus the smaller 25-foot octagon? Several fighters, including Matt Mitrione and Tim Kennedy, have spoken out, saying it affects the way they prepare for their fights. Which one do you guys prefer as spectators? And John, does the size of the cage make a difference to you as the referee?
Oh man, it's funny because I was just tweeting to Matt Mitrione because he was sitting there saying it does make a difference. And you look and you go, obviously the 30-foot cage is a bigger cage. It's got 5 more feet, so you add all those dimensions across the entire width of the cage. It's going to be more space, but that more space, is what we were used to, and it's what we've done. And then when the WEC was absorbed by the UFC, the UFC was using a 25-foot cage for the WEC shows, and it worked well for them. Now they're smaller guys, if you want to sit there and say it, but when you say, it's not like, we're talking Demetrius Johnson and Stefan Struve. Yes, Stefan is way taller than DJ is. But when you look at the actual footprint of him moving around in a cage, it's not that much different. Okay, he's not horizontal, and so the whole point comes to this: the 25-foot cage. A lot of people are going to say it brings fighters a little bit closer. Muhammad Ali fought all of his fights in a 20-foot ring. Okay, sometimes smaller. All right, and he seemed to move pretty goddamn well. All right, and you look, and it's the amount of square footage is not what gives the fighter the ability to stay away from their opponent. It's their footwork. Footwork means that you're able to have good movement, which can keep you at bay from your opponent, and you're hard to cut off. There's all these different things. It's going to be hard to cut anyone off in a round ring, an octagon, any shape that's got that no square corner. There's no 90 degree. It's really tough to cut somebody off. So the fighter, if they want to, try to force him in the fence, you can always try to force someone in the fence, but there's the ability for the fighter to use footwork to get themselves out. I don't care what size cage they use. It doesn't matter to me at all. It makes no difference. And yes, the 30-foot cage gives me more area to stand back and move away from them, so it makes my life easy. But the 25-foot cage overall, if I look at it, it seems to be that one ends up having better fights in it. Not all the time, but overall on a percentage-wise, the fights seem to, be less where we have the stalling or the person trying to, keep someone at bay and moving so much that we have a track meet with someone trying to get away from them. The 25-foot cage has got plenty of space. If it was an 18-foot cage, and I've done, God knows how many fights in an 18-foot cage, that's a small cage. That's starting to give a guy who wants movement problems. But the 25-foot cage should not give them problems. The 30-foot cage, is fine. The 25-foot cage is fine. I don't care either way which cage they're going to use. It's just that there are the two cages. The UFC does utilize both of them. It usually will utilize the 25-foot cage when they have a smaller venue. When they have a smaller venue, they're going to do something at the Hard Rock or something, we'll say at, a smaller area, as far as the amount of seats, they'll put in the smaller cage because it just is easier to fit inside the location. It makes sense.
Our next question comes from Twitter, @GoodNewsEric. Use the hashtag AskBJM to ask. That's a lot of asks right there. John, what's the weirdest thing said to you by a fighter during a fight?
Oh, my God. The weirdest thing that's impossible for me to say. I have funny things at times that are said. The ones that are really funny are the ones that, something happens and, especially when fighters get knocked out, even though a knockout is not a funny situation. It's a very serious situation, but funny things happen off of it. When you sit there and, there's varying degrees of knockouts and what fighters will do off of those varying degrees. Many times, fighters are knocked out and they don't know where they're at. They don't know that they're actually, competing in a fight. They don't remember anything from really that day of what they, were doing. I've had ones where, guys are, they're not, my favorite was a guy, it was a small show, and the guy gets knocked out, and he gets knocked out in like 7-8 seconds. He gets hit with a shot and he goes stiff and he falls down stiff and his head slams into the canvas, and I stopped the fight and he's out, and he was out for, a minute and a half. It was a long time. And by the time, you get to the point where the doctors, are sitting there and they're now sitting him up and then finally putting him on a stool, he doesn't remember anything. He doesn't know what kind of car he drives. He doesn't know anything. And he finally is looking around, and finally it's like this moment of clarity came back and his brain started to actually work. And it had to be about, 3 minutes later, and we've already I've gone over and I've raised the hand of the other guy. They made the announcement, and the guy is, he's talking to the, one of the little commentators they have come into the ring, and he's got his hat on, he's got his shirt on, and the guy looks and he says, what the hell? Why is he able to wear his stuff inside of the ring like that? They make me take it off outside. Let's go. I want to fight. And, sorry, the fight's over. He goes, I did not fight. And he's sitting there arguing in his corners. He was saying, yes, you did. He goes, I did not fight, because he doesn't remember it. And those are the kind of things you just sit there and you laugh. They're funny.
And this from Ben Theodore. Does the referee ever try to not get in the way of the camera or the best camera angles? Ben continues. John, I'm guessing hell no, but thought I'd ask anyway.
Well, it's a good question. And what I really try to do is, if I can stay away from a camera, I do. But I worry about staying out of the view of the judges. That's really what, if I'm cognizant of anything, I don't know where the camera guys are always going to be. But I do know where my judges are at, and if I move myself to a place and I think, I'm blocking, you're going to see me move a little bit off, so I open up the view of the fight to the judge so they can see what's going on, so they can make a proper call. So with the TV camera, there's too many, there's just too many of them, and there's a director in there that can go, camera 1, go to 4, go back to 2. And I'm not worried so much about that. If I know that it's there, I will try to get out of its way, but I always try to get out of the way of the judges.
Remember, email us your questions, info@letsgetitonpodcast.com, and submit them on Twitter by using the hashtag AskBJM. Still to come on this week's episode of Let's Get It On, John and I will be joined by the outstanding MMA journalist Marc Raimondi to discuss his in-depth investigative reporting on the unsanctioned California-based promotion Xplode Fight Series. With Big John McCarthy, I'm Sean Wheelock, and you are listening to Let's Get It On.
Hey, this is Sean Wheelock. Join me on Saturday, October 3rd and Sunday, October 4th for the MMA Classic Fan Expo, which will take place in Syracuse, New York at the Center of Progress building. I'll be there to host a screening of the very first UFC with a question and answer session to follow, which will feature UFC creator and founder Art Davie and a first ever reunion of UFC 1 fighters, including Gerard Gordeau and Art Jimerson. Numerous MMA stars past and present will also be in attendance throughout the weekend, including Don Fry, Claudia Gadella, Mark Coleman, Joe Riggs, Butterbean, Matt Hamill, Carla Esparza, Gary Goodridge, and Felice Herrick. Plus, there will be an MMA celebrity roast of UFC Hall of Famer Dan Severn, as well as live MMA and grappling events. You can get autographs, purchase fight memorabilia and merchandise, and best of all, hang out and take pictures with some of the true greats of mixed martial arts. Tickets are available right now online at themmaclassic.com. Again, that's online at themmaclassic.com. October 3rd and 4th in Syracuse, New York for the MMA Classic Fan Expo. I'll see you there. Hey, this is Sean Wheelock.
And this is Big John McCarthy.
If you're a fan of our show, then you're going to love the rest of the Ignotainment podcast lineup.
Like the Ocho Man behind the 8 Ball and the Whiskey Philosopher with Jeff Cooper.
You can find these great podcasts and more at ignotainment.com. Thanks again and enjoy the rest of the program.
Let's get it on!
When looking for new and exciting clothing concepts, look no further than Lambs to Lions. Lambs to Lions has great designs that incorporates the past from boxing with the new and exciting evolution of MMA. We all start out as lambs, but with time, training, and hard work, we can all become lions. Be part of the Lambs to Lions movement and check out all of their great designs. You can get your Lambs to Lions gear at the Las Vegas Fight Shop or go to lambstolionsbrand.com.
Now, back to Let's Get It On with your hosts, Big John McCarthy and Sean Wheelock.
We're now joined by one of the best writers in all of combat sports, Marc Raimondi of MMAfighting.com, who has just published a comprehensive expose of Xplode Fight Series, which stages unsanctioned pro and amateur MMA bouts in the state of California. You can read Marc's articles on Xplode Fight Series at MMAfighting.com. Hey, Marc, welcome back to Let's Get It On.
It's quite the introduction. Thank you, guys.
Well, Marc, let's talk about your expose, and that's what it is. It's an expose. It's investigative journalism, and full credit to you. We don't see enough of this in MMA. What first drew your attention to look at Xplode Fight Series?
Well, I think that even before the last few months, Xplode Fight Series had kind of, I kind of gotten a reputation because it was widely reported that there were some egregious matchmaking. Like if you look at some of the fighters that had gone on to the UFC and to Bellator, they were beating guys and girls who had records, 0-22 and 1-16 and 0-5 and there were a few articles about it previously. And I think that a lot of people took that for face value. I think a lot of people said, well, okay, there's egregious matchmaking going on. That's obviously a very bad thing. Some of these men and ladies are not very good at fighting, and yet they're letting them get in the cage. But I think it was really that viral video, guys, of when Lee McFarlane knocked out Katie Castro in January, that really made me I was like, something's not right about this. And it was really about, it's not so much that Xplode Fight Series has people who, there are a lot of guys that are kicking around in the regional circuit who train, a couple times a week, and they're not that great. They go in and they fight, and they mostly lose, and they have, lopsided records. But this is not quite that. It's not quite that. This is actual people who have no training, really, who are pretty much untrained, who don't have a gym. They're listed as freelance and independent, and they essentially go into these shows, and they get paid to get beat up. And that's not MMA. That's something totally different. That's pretty. In my opinion, that's pretty disgusting. And that's kind of what I saw when I saw that video. And I just wanted to look more into it and see what else was going on down there. And from what many people told me, it's not that great. Obviously, Xplode Fight Series owner Greg Sharp tells a different tale, and he defends his product, and he says that it follows pretty closely along with what fiction shows do. So that's his denial, and that's his take. But a lot of people said otherwise. So I'm sure you guys read the article and you know what I'm talking about.
Well, Marc, I'll tell you what, I read your 4-part series, which is really well done. And thank you for doing it. It's what needs to be done. All these people that are doing the things like Greg Sharp is doing, it needs to be exposed because it's bullshit. He's endangering people's lives. He's endangering the sport of MMA because people do not differentiate between Xplode and the UFC when it comes to reporters in the mainstream of journalism. They don't even understand the difference, and they don't understand what this guy is doing. And the soccer mom is the match that you're talking about. And I guess that's the reason maybe it got that viral output is because of the term. You even had that in one of your stories that, he thinks it's because it was the soccer mom. If it was the street fighter, it wouldn't have gotten anything. But it's a matter of he's putting people that can't fight against people that can because he wants a train wreck. And he's getting the train wreck. And one of those train wrecks somewhere along the way is going to end up with someone getting seriously hurt or dying. And then, it just puts a bad mark on MMA because that's not the way the sport is supposed to be run.
And the other thing, too, guys, is that the entire – I actually blame the entire system for something like Xplode Fight Series. Greg Sharp would not exist unless there – well, I shouldn't say Greg Sharp wouldn't exist, but Xplode Fight Series would not exist unless there was a reason, a market for this kind of thing. And it's very true. The UFC doesn't sign someone who is 6-3 against really good competition. The UFC doesn't sign someone who is 4-2. They fought really good regional competition. They sign guys who are 8-0 and 10-0 and 15-0. Same thing for Bellator. Same thing for World Series of Fighting. And that really, really is the reason why Xplode Fight Series exists. If that was not the case, then there'd be no reason to bring in real trained professional fighters and have them beat someone essentially from the crowd or off the street. It's really the entire system, and it's really the entire system's fault. Obviously, some people take it to different levels, like a Xplode Fight Series where a lot of players told me that they don't need to do blood work, do medical. That's very, very, very scary. So I blame the entire system, because again, if it wasn't for the system being a little messed up, then something like a Xplode Fight Series would have no need that.
Marc, let's talk about the loophole. And John, it's a loophole as well as I do, as well as Marc does. Because after all, this isn't the state of California. Andy Foster runs one of the absolute best athletic commissions. But the loophole is that these fights, Xplode Fight Series, take place on the San Pasqual Native American Reservation. So it's sovereign land, and yet San Pasqual is not a member of the ABC. Numerous tribes in the U.S. and Canada are ABC members. San Pasqual is not. Therefore, it's really just like you're fighting in a foreign country. It's essentially no man's land. You can do whatever you want there in terms of fighting.
Yeah, it's and the weird thing is, in my research and my reporting, I spoke to Alan Lawson, who he's the chairman of the tribe, the San Pasqual Mission Indians, and he told me that the tribe doesn't even really endorse or support Xplode Fight Series, but because of the way that I guess policies. There's a family that owns that land, and the family, it's their land and it belongs to them. They can do pretty much whatever they want, including running these shows. So I found that to be very interesting, which is a very unique circumstance that you guys know. And the commission the commission has almost no jurisdiction at all. Not almost. They have no jurisdiction at all against any of these shows. And they only can come in and regulate if they're explicitly invited by the Indian tribe. They really can't even call them up and say, hey, we want to come. That's a no-no. I mean, because it's a federal deal. It's one of those things. No one wants to infringe upon the rights of Native Americans, and the government, state and federal, is very sensitive about that kind of stuff. So it's just one of those things where people can get away with doing this stuff, and I don't think these tribes and the people who run them really understand the liabilities that are in place. Something terrible happens, and no one wants to see that. They could be held liable. If, God forbid, someone dies at one of these shows, the Indian reservation could be held liable for that. And I don't know if they realize that. And I think that they're trying to wash their hands of some of this stuff, but it doesn't hold up. I spoke to Haskell Alexander, who is he's one of the deputy regulators for the Chickasaw Nation, which regulates shows out of Windstar Walk of Snow, which Bellator obviously runs a lot. And he told me that if something happens at one of these shows, Indian reservation is pretty much held liable for it. So I don't think they're aware of that, and that's a scary thing.
Yeah, when you're talking about some of these Indian tribes and what you're talking about, Haskell Alexander does run the Chickasaw Nation. I work for him, and he's a great guy. You got Mohegan's Son, you got Foxwood, you have a lot of tribal commissions out there that are putting on fights, but they're doing it exactly the right way. They're using the commission. And what people don't understand is when we have someone like with what Greg Sharp is doing, there's no oversight at all. Meaning, if someone wants to put on a show, we'll say in, Mohegan Sun, and they're a promoter, they're going to give that fight card to Mike Mazzulli, and Mike Mazzulli is going to okay or approve those fights, or he's going to look and say, I'm not going to allow that fight. That's a mismatch. And that's what's not happening with what we have in just one element, because there's everything that's not happening when it comes to Xplode. He's trying to avoid regulation. He's trying to make money. This is what it comes down to, and everyone needs to understand. Greg Sharp can sit there and say whatever he wants. This is about making money. And any penny that doesn't go in his pocket and goes to doing something that's right for the sport or right for the fighters, he doesn't give a shit about. And he goes and does things outside of regulation where fighters' lives are in danger because he doesn't do the right things. And all of this is what leads to a giant problem for the sport. And what the state of California, I think, is going to do is any fighter that is caught fighting with Xplode will never, they're going to be suspended. They cannot be licensed by the state. They're going to go into the ABC database as a suspended fighter, so no one's going to be able to use them. And the officials, if they're going to continue to work for this promotion, they're not going to be licensed either. And that's the only way that you can really attack the promotion when it's doing this on sovereign land.
And that's something that the CSAC is talking about. And I was at a meeting a few weeks ago, and Andy Foster, the executive officer, presented the facts to the commission, and it seemed very hesitant to really interfere in something going on Native American land. Again, that whole thing. And the only thing, like John said, they can do is really they can only was licensee. So if a fighter fights at a full fight series or gladiator challenge, they're suspended, their license is suspended or their license is revoked, something like that. That's really the only thing they can do outside of them trying to educate fighters and trying to educate these reservations and these people who run them. And also one of the things they talked about was increasing medicals and blood work for fighters who come from these shows because, again, so many people told me that these shows, you don't need to be in blood work. So there are fighters potentially, and I don't know this for sure, but there are fighters potentially who could be fighting with a communicable disease at one of these shows, and it could get transferred. And that is probably the worst part. Outside of the videos and what we've seen and some of the bad knockouts, that kind of stuff, that almost pales in comparison to the fact that disease could spread, and no one wants that. So a fighter essentially get a disease in one of these unsanctioned shows and then come back to the regular population, the CSAC and sanctioned pool, and spread that disease. That is crazy. That is probably the biggest thing in my mind. Why there needs to be some kind of regulation. It's hard to do, but some kind of regulation against it.
Yeah, and the other part, when you look at it, Mark, and this is where they're going to sit there. Well, we have doctors, we have ambulances. No, you don't. Okay, there's a huge difference between being a doctor and being a good ringside physician. It's like saying that, well, I teach school. Well, what do you teach? Well, I teach kids art. Well, you're going to have a hard time teaching, physics or chemistry to someone if you're teaching kids art. And there's just differences in, the quality of the people and what they understand of what they're looking at. There's all kinds of doctors out there. And you can have you can say I'm a doctor when you're a dentist, and we've had it. And that's happened with fighting. And, we have psychiatrists that are all of a sudden ringside physicians. There's a difference. There's a real difference when it comes to a good ringside physician. And these are the things that all of them, these guys aren't getting any medicals, beforehand. They're not getting medicals while they're there. They're not getting anything checked out after they're done. There's all kinds of things that just lead to something bad happening. It's not, could it happen? It will happen.
Marc, let's talk about the really aftermath, I think, of your initial 3-part series. Then you followed up on another article. Again, you can read all of this from Marc Raimondi on Xplode Fight Series, MMAfighting.com. But now UMMAF, which is part of Kick International, has now stepped into the fray. And just as background, Kick International, John, you can speak to this as well as me. They're known as someone who comes in mainly on kickboxing in the state of Missouri, which is about 15 miles from where I'm sitting, in Shawnee, Kansas, across the state line. They'll regulate a lot of amateur MMA. Kansas regulates pro and AMI MMA. Missouri only regulates pro MMA. So Kick International is an amateur sanctioning body. Through them, UMMAF is trying to sort of take over, I guess, the AMI side of MMA. But they've now entered the fray, and I guess, Marc, this is from directly a result of your reporting.
Yes, last week, Xplode Fight Series hired UMAS as their sanctioning body beginning in November. And I spoke on the phone last week with UMAS Director of Operations, Ryan Bergman, and he was very confident that all the things that have been reported about Xplode Fight Series will be cleaned up. Will be cleaned up, and there will be no. Obviously their matchmaking will be vetted. Fighters will need medicals. Fighters will need blood work. There will be an experienced ringside physician on hand. Better quality officials and judges and all the stuff that comes with sanctioning. Now, I don't know a whole lot about UMAF, and like you said, Sean, in the past it's been mostly a amateur sanctioning. The Kick International is mostly amateur. But they said they're going to sanction, they're going to regulate the entire Xplode Fight Series shows, which have amateur and pros. So it really remains to be seen what exactly happens. I'm personally we'll take a wait and see approach. I'm going to try to go down there in November and see what's going on. But I think that it's a step in the right direction. I will say that I think it's a step in the right direction. I'm not sure what UMAF is all about, but anything has to be better than a promoter just trying to regulate things himself. Because as John put, it's just there are too many things that can go wrong. So I'm going to wait and see. I'm cautiously optimistic that things will get better for Xplode Fight Series. And I guess I don't know how it works, but I guess CSAC is a little bit on the expensive side. I know that Andy Foster, the executive officer, and John Carvelli, the chairman of CSAC, both told me that they'd be willing to work with Xplode and work with the reservation to kind of keep costs to a minimum and kind of keep costs, where it's reasonable for a local regional promoter to take care of that kind of stuff. But Xplode wanted to go in the direction of a third-party sanctioning body, so I give a little bit of credit to at least them saying, hey, we need to bring someone in and to do a better job with this kind of stuff.
Let me ask you a question, Mark, here. Let's see. Since you have CSAC that's available and saying they will work with you, and you also have an amateur organization that has been designated by CSAC as the Camo. Only amateur organization in Camo, why is it you would go outside of that? Just a question. What do you think?
Well, I think that what they would say is cost. And UMAF also claims to...
Again, what did I say was the main thing that Greg Sharp is worried about?
Money.
Making money. And money is what UMAF is there for. That's the only thing, is they want to make money. So they'll say that they'll do it cheaper than someone else, which means what? That they do the same job or they do a shittier job.
Well,
I'm sorry for answering.
Like I said, I'm not sure how to answer that. I totally get what you're saying, and I guess we'll find out what exactly happens in November. But at least they're acknowledging that this kind of regulation needs to happen. So I give them credit for that at the least.
Mark, let me ask you this. Were you aware before you started writing on Xplode Fight Series kind of that underground world of unsanctioned MMA? And again, this isn't backyard fighting. This isn't basement fighting. This isn't closed gym fighting. These are events that are promoted, that are advertised, that people purchase tickets to. They're just unsanctioned. And the dirty little secret of our sport is it happens across the United States and Canada.
Right, yeah. It's I had an idea that this kind of stuff went on, but I didn't realize how much. I didn't realize exactly what was going on in the details and the whole processes and how prevalent it was. And I spoke to Jason Herzog, I think one of the best referees in the business, and he was one of his first referees, like back in 2013, maybe even earlier than that, 2011, 2012, when Xplode first started. And he left the organization because he didn't feel comfortable. He didn't feel like he could do his job correctly with the matchmaking they did. But he also said that Xplode Fight Series is not the only promotion in the country doing this kind of stuff, and that there are other fights in the Midwest, places like that are kind of on par with what Xplode Fight Series does. So I kind of opened up my eyes and said, this is not the only. It's not an isolated incident. This is not the only place doing that kind of stuff. And really, I think that, and it goes back to what I said earlier about how there is kind of a need for this kind of thing in a weird way. Fighters don't have much money. They don't get paid a whole lot in the first place. Not even at the pool, they don't get paid very much. But at the local, regional level, they get paid, next to nothing. So getting medicals and blood work is kind of expensive. I think one of the fighters told me that California can run, around $800, which is a lot of money for someone who really doesn't take a whole bunch, and they're taking up a day from work and that kind of stuff. So it's easy to go to one of these shows you don't need to pay that money. You just walk in and you try to sell tickets to your buddies to come see you fight, and then you get paid at the end of the night, win or lose. So I understand there's kind of a need for it. Plus, if you're really trying to make the big show, trying to make the highest levels, and you're pretty good, having a great record is important. If you can go 10-0 against guys who are 3-6 and 0-5, and the UFC is not going to care about that. They're only going to care about that record that they see. Bellator's not going to care about that. Case in point, Bellator just signed the woman who beat the quote-unquote soccer mom in the Xplode Fight Series. Pro debut, Alina McFarland knocks out Katie Castro. She's 1-0 as a pro. Bellator signs her right away. So doesn't that show right there that there's a market for this kind of thing? And to me, that bothers me. To me, that kind of thing, as long as big promotions continue doing that kind of stuff, people like Greg Sharp will always have a place in regional MMA, because Bellator kind of shows everyone like, hey, it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter, that you knocked out someone who's probably never trained a day in her life. We're still going to sign you to one of the biggest organizations in the world. And that's the kind of thing that keeps Xplode Fight Series, Gladiator Challenge, all those other unsanctioned events across the country still going, is the hope for signing to a greater show.
But you know what? This is what it comes down to. There's been a lot of fighters out there. And if I started to, Mark, you remember who Dustin Jensen is?
I do not.
Okay. And this is the problem, is Dustin Jensen was an MMA fighter that died in an unregulated, unsanctioned fight. Okay? And see, people forget quickly because, it goes away. But it doesn't go away for everyone. And what these people are doing, it's endangering the lives of people whose lives are already endangered by the activity that they're participating in. And yes, it's, they know what they're going into. But a fighter, to sit there and say they understand all the things that they're opening themselves up to by going into a show like Xplode, they don't. All they know is it's a fight, and that's all they think about. And they don't think about the fact that they could be fighting against someone that has hepatitis. They don't think about the fact they'd be fighting against someone that has HIV, and that all it takes is a little transfer, and they can end up affecting their lives forever. They're going into a place and fighting where there's no real doctors to actually take care of them. No one that really understands fighting and does this. They're going into a place that is limited in their ability to get them to somebody. If they do end up getting compromised in the fight, they're not in a position to be taken care of the proper way. There's no evacuation plan. There's none of the things that take place when you look at the Nevada State Athletic Commission, the California State Athletic Commission, the Mohegan Sun as a tribe, Foxwood. All these things are things that people don't see. Evacuation plans, all the things that are put in place in case that fighter gets in trouble. And what is being done with all of these unregulated shows is they're just waiting for a Dustin Jensen to come up on their doorstep. And I can start naming off a bunch of other fighters. Let's talk about, all these guys out there that have died in unregulated shows of MMA. It's amazing that the UFC hasn't had any, catastrophic injury or even death. Right. And it's a lot of the reasons why is because they do things right. Bellator has not had that catastrophic. Why? Because things are done right. And that's sometimes the difference between one person making it and the other person not. And what Greg Sharp is doing is Greg Sharp is saying, I'm just being here for the fighters. He's full of shit. He's there for himself and he's there to make money. Sorry.
Mark, do you have a comment on that?
Well, I mean, obviously, I don't disagree with John at all. I mean, I think Greg Sharp is a businessman. And he doesn't really have any kind of background in MMA. He turned his gym into an MMA gym in San Diego a few years ago before he ever started Xplode Fight Series, because he saw a trend in the market. And I think that he is savvy. I think that he's a savvy businessman in a way, because he saw the trend in the MMA fitness market. He kind of got ahead of the curve, and his gym did well. And then he noticed that there was a market for promoting MMA. After some of his fighters were a Gladiator Challenge, and they weren't happy with how they were treating Gladiator Challenge, Greg Sharp made Xplode Fight Series. So I think that there is a lot of truth to what John is saying. I don't think Greg Sharp would necessarily deny that he's in it for the money. I think he's a businessman. I think that's what he is first and foremost. The other issue, at least in California, and probably goes for across the country as well, is that it doesn't seem like there's a lot of events sanctioned in California, especially in Southern California, which is weird because there's so many fighters and gyms in Southern California. It's a huge hotbed for MMA, but there isn't a lot of regional promotion. BAMA USA does a really nice job, but they only run maybe 4 times a year. And there really isn't a whole. I know there's a couple other small ones that have popped up recently that have done an okay job. But if you want a consistent fight, it's very easy for you to go to Xplode Fight Series, the Gladiator Challenge. You can fight almost once a month or every 2 months. So I don't know what the answer is to that, but running a regional MMA promotion, as you guys know, is really not a winning proposition. It's very hard to make money doing that. And if there aren't a lot of promoters out there to run shows, then there aren't a lot of fighters in fights. And there are a lot of fighters in California, and some of them are going down to San Diego and fighting for Xplode. And that's another issue. That's another reason why a place like Xplode Fight Series and places like Gladiator Challenge exist, because there's not a lot of options for fighters in these areas.
Marc, great stuff. Thanks for being back on Let's Get It On. Really nicely done on your investigative reporting.
Thank you so much, guys. I really appreciate it.
Thanks for coming on, Marc. Appreciate that story, too.
That's
Thanks.
Marc Raimondi. You can read his investigative reporting on Xplode Fight Series, as well as all of his excellent work at MMAfighting.com. John, as I was reading Raimondi's work on Xplode, it made me think about when I started as a pro boxing referee. It was in the 1990s. I was 24 years old. I started in Kansas. We had no athletic commission. There was no ABC. It was just like this. I refereed boxing where they literally pulled people out of the audience. So forget blood work. Here's a guy coming out of the audience. People in basketball shorts, people in regular tennis shoes. A guy once tried to come into the ring wearing a nipple ring. And I said, no, absolutely not. He got in there because there were no inspectors. The craziness that I saw. I had a fighter at least 5 times. I had him in a different state, and he was a different name. I said, I thought your name was this. He goes, nah, I just said that so they didn't see my record. My name is actually this. I'm like,
not today.
I've known you 2 years. What is this? You know, that's craziness I saw. I can only imagine the craziness that you saw in the early days of the UFC in the 1990s. We put in the book with Art Davey, Is This Legal? One of the main reasons Art chose Colorado was because on the books they allowed bare knuckles fighting, but more importantly, there was no state athletic commission. Art literally with Horan got to be judge and jury, and now fast forward from 1993 to 2015, Xplode Fight Series, they get to be judge and jury.
Absolutely, and look at it's the way that the UFC started, but it started that way, but it didn't continue that way. And there's reasons why it didn't continue that way. It didn't continue that way because you know what? You need oversight, because you need to have people that are looking at what you're doing, because when you're the sole entity and that tragedy comes, you're the sole entity, and the people are going to go after you. They're going to go after, in this case, they're going to go after the reservation. Trust me. And they're going to get money based upon you trying to keep yourself as this one little bubble over here that, well, we do our own rules, we do our own regulations. We're judge, jury, and sometimes, unfortunately, possibly executioner. The whole thing with, Greg Sharp can sit here and say whatever he wants about he's trying to just, take care of fighters. Bullshit. You're full of it. All you're trying to do is put a goddamn dollar in your pocket. And everything he does, from tomato can MMA, he's got that on his fucking cage. Really? What are you trying to tell people? What's a tomato can? Come on. It means that you got people that can't fight fighting. The things that he does, he sits there and he complains about, that video wouldn't have gone, so viral if, they didn't use the word soccer mom. He loves the fact that they use soccer mom. He's got his YouTube page where he hasn't taken that video down. It's still there because it's making him money. He makes money off of that video. He's got so many hits. That video has made him more money than probably a stupid show. It's people like this that harm the sport. They do things outside of what the norm is because they know that they're unable to do it in a regulated fashion, the way everyone is supposed to do it, because they're just not that good a business person when it comes to it. And so I'm going to cut corners. I'm going to cheat. I'm going to try to do things on the sly because that's the way I can make money. And that's why you have people like Marc Raimondi saying, your show's a piece of shit.
Every week on Let's Get It On, we bring you our poll question. You can cast your vote on our website, letsgetitonpodcast.com. This week's poll question, and put some thought before you answer yes or no on our website, letsgetitonpodcast.com, because this can cut a couple of ways. Do you feel that results in unsanctioned pro MMA bouts should be counted on a fighter's official record? Again, vote yes or no. It definitely cuts both ways, John, because on the one hand, the fighter can try to build up their record on unsanctioned fights. And again, this isn't just Xplode. It's prominent Xplode, but this happens across North America. This happens throughout the MMA world. There are unsanctioned countries. There are unsanctioned bouts on Native American tribes. Alaska does not have an athletic commission. But if a promoter turns it into the databases, gives it to SureDog, for instance, it goes on the record. Some fighters would want those on. Others who, like Marc said, a guy was 0-22. He wants that taken off of the record. I don't know. What do you think about that, the vote?
It's a hard, it's a hard area to cover when you're looking at it, because really it's not about, North America. It's about the world. And you have, look at, if you have a fight going on in Japan, there's no true regulation. So people, and I've seen, people that, are part of the ABC say that Fedor Emelianenko only has, a record of, we'll say, 1-3 because that's the fights that he's done in North America. And you look and you go, no, you can't. Look at the fights, every fight he did in rings, every fight he did those are all real fights. Those are all, they don't have regulation the way we have it. But look, that's a different country. You can't sit there and look at things that way. So that's where your problem lies. It lies in the fact that there are fights going on in other countries in ways that, they do regulate it in their own fashion. It just doesn't have an athletic commission associated with it. And you've got to count those fights. But any fight that's coming out from sovereign land without an athletic commission is an unregulated fight in North America, Canada, and the U.S. If you have anybody who fights in one of those shows, that fight, there should be no record of it. It doesn't exist. And that fighter does not get licensed when they try for a true athletic commission license. Congratulations. You just put yourself in a position. Now you have to wait a year. And, the fighter's, career in life is not that long as far as making money. They don't want to take that year off. I don't blame them. So then start going to regulated shows. And there, Marc said something about there being, not a lot of regulated shows in California. There are enough. The problem is you get some fighters that are wanting to do, fights, one after the other, and they can't get that done with regulation because it won't be allowed. And so they'll go and they'll do these fights off of regulation. And there's reasons why they're not wanting you to fight so much. As far as your health, when we're young, we think that we're invincible. We think that this is not going to affect us. We think that, it's going to be fine. And it is while you're young to a point, unless you really get hurt. But you will pay for it later on in life. Trust me. Okay? I'm paying for all the stupidity I did when I was young because it doesn't matter. I'm fine. I can do it. The regulation is there to help you. And we need to have a system where people understand fighting in these shows is not going to be beneficial for me. It's only going to hurt me.
John, what's your message to the referees, the judges who listen to Let's Get It On, who get called to work an unsanctioned fight? Not just Xplode fight series, maybe it's Xplode, but any unsanctioned fight. If they're legit and they get this call.
I tell guys all the time, do not work an unregulated show. If you're working an unregulated show, you're screwing up, you're hurting the sport. And when you decide that, I want to go here or I want to re-up my license, and then your license is not given back to you, don't cry. Don't sit there and complain. Don't say they treated you wrong. They didn't. They went off of the actions that you decided to take. They ended up giving you there's a consequence that comes with it. And when you get spanked, don't sit there and bitch and complain because it was your choice to go do those shows. You don't have to do them. Don't. You know, a lot of guys say, well, I just want to work. I understand you wanting to work, but you need to understand you're a representation of this sport. And when you go and you work that show, you are sending out the wrong message. You're saying it's okay. It's not.
John, for me, the solution to this problem, and it's most definitely a problem, is suspensions. Because there's the federal database through the ABC for judges, for referees, and most definitely for fighters. If you're on an unsanctioned, unregulated card in any of those capacities, to me, suspend someone, that probably ends their participation.
That's exactly it. And that's, you know, that's where California is going to do with, you know, the officials that are doing that show. You know, some of them are going to say, well, I don't work in California anyways. Congratulations. Wherever you decide to work, it's going to follow you. Because when you go for a license somewhere, every license, you know, when you fill out the paperwork, it's going to say, have you ever been suspended from another athletic commission? And you know what? You got two choices. You can lie and say no, or you can mark that box, and then they start to look at you and go, well, why? And then it opens up a can of worms of, well, I did unregulated shows. Why would you go do an unregulated show? You're just leading yourself down a path you can't win. And for the fighter, again, you know, their careers, their lifespan in this sport is not that long, and you don't want to lose a year. And to lose a year because you're, you know, not doing anything wrong other than going and fighting for an unregulated show, you're wasting your career. You're wasting your time. It's not worth it. There are shows for you to fight in. Don't go and do unregulated shows.
We're back with you next week for a new episode of Let's Get It On, first available on Friday. Download and subscribe to our podcast on the iTunes Store. For Android, download the Stitcher app and subscribe. And you can go straight to our website, letsgetitonpodcast.com. You can also find us on social media, facebook.com/letsgetitonpodcast, and on Twitter, @PodcastMMA for this show, and for us personally, @JohnMcCarthyMMA and @Sean Wheelock. To ask us a question, make a comment, or inquire about becoming a sponsor of Let's Get It On, email us at info@letsgetitonpodcast.com. Again, that's info@letsgetitonpodcast.com. We are gaining listeners every week in the U.S., Canada, and around the world. Please help us continue to spread the word about Let's Get It On. For Big John McCarthy, Marc Raimondi, and Everett Hicks, who did a great job subbing this week for our regular producer, Chris Lakin, I'm Sean Wheelock. Thanks for listening, everyone. This has been a presentation of Ignotainment Media Network, online at ignotainment.com.
Let's Get It On with Big John McCarthy and Sean Wheelock, only on the Ignotainment Media Network. Don't forget to leave a rating and review in the comments section of the iTunes Podcast Store. If you have questions, comments, or are interested in sponsoring the show, contact us at info@letsgetitonpodcast.com, or check out our additional lineup of podcasts, including Ocho Man, Behind the Eight Ball, The Whiskey Philosopher, and Youth Baseball Talk at ignotainment.com.